to just say, too, that it seems unlikely that China would intervene in the way that President Trump is hoping for.
But President Donald Trump puts a lot of stock in personal relationships. And he does have a relationship. We don't know if it's good or bad, but he certainly has one with Xi Jinping. And he's going to use that publicly to put pressure on China to try and help out. His biggest card he's got at the moment is cancelling the summit. What does that mean? Katrina, Trump is expected to be in China at the end of the month, but in that article, he's making possibly a veiled threat, at least pressure on Beijing to try and help him. I mean, how's that going to go down?
I think it's going to go down well. In the article, Trump mentioned China is one of the beneficiaries of oil being shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. That is correct. He also said that China gets about 90% of its oil through the strait. That's not correct. It gets more like 40%, but it is still a substantial amount. Now, as far as we know, that visit by Trump to China is going ahead. In fact, over the last 2 days, today and yesterday, Chinese and U.S. officials have been meeting in Paris to discuss potential outcomes for that visit that Trump is expected to make. And the Chinese side and the U.S. side said that was constructive and positive. So we're yet to hear any official response to this Financial Times interview. But if that meeting or that summit were to be cancelled, it would indeed be a blow. This has been months in the making. And the whole point of this visit is to stabilize the relationship between the two biggest superpowers, to prevent a long list of disagreements from spiraling out of control into a wider conflict. And there's a lot at stake for both the U.S. and Chinese economies. On the agenda were a few trade agreements, the discussion about the export of rare earths from China to the U.S. and technology exports from the U.S. to China. So if this were to be delayed or postponed indefinitely, that would be bad news for the companies operating in both countries. And it does show how volatile this relationship between Washington and Beijing is. China has made no promises that this meeting is going ahead, and actually there have been reports that China has been a bit frustrated about lack of forward planning from Washington. But so far as we know, officials here on both sides are planning for that trip to happen.
Now, Katrina, one thing we do know about Donald Trump is he's very, very good at threatening nations. Now, if he does threaten to delay or cancel even the summit, what does China do then?
Well, I think it's very unlikely that China is going to do what Trump asked, that is to send some material help to help keep the Strait of Hormuz unblocked. I think there are three main reasons for that. First, Chinese President Xi Jinping does not have a history of capitulating or following any of Trump's orders or coercion or threats. And we saw this last year with the long-running trade dispute when Trump hiked those tariffs up to over 100%. China just said fine, and it hiked tariffs up in kind. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we know that China has been one of the biggest critics of the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran. It condemned those attacks that happened when negotiations were still underway. China's foreign minister has said time and time again that force is not the answer. It's urging for de-escalation and return to the negotiating table. So it's quite difficult to imagine that Beijing would send firepower to that region. And third, I think the last reason is that when you look at the Chinese oil that is transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, there are some reports that Chinese ships are still being allowed to pass. And that is because China is a very friendly and positive partner for Iran. It's the biggest trading partner, the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. So there are reports, albeit unconfirmed, that Iran is still allowing Chinese shipments to pass through, the Strait of Hormuz. So that would reduce even further Beijing's motivation to send some warships or do whatever Trump said to keep the Strait of Hormuz unblocked.
That's Katrina Yu, live for us there from Beijing. Now, Andy Mock is a senior research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization, a think tank that's based in Beijing. He's also a professor at the Beijing Foreign Studies University, and he joins us from Beijing. Andy, this was completely predictable. and totally avoidable. The shutting of the Strait of Hormuz was going to happen if this escalated. But does this give China an opportunity to reassert itself, assert itself as an alternative to the US when it comes to a power broker?
Well, I think you're certainly right that the U.S. Walked into, a morass or a quagmire. And there's an American phrase, FOFO, right? Mess around and find out. And I think it really, again, for whatever reasons, is finding itself entangled in a situation that's very, very difficult to extract itself from. And I think the best way to understand maybe how China is viewing this is there's a very famous saying, I believe, attributed to Napoleon, never interrupt your opponent when he is making a mistake. So I think that from that perspective, certainly while the U.S. is tied down, I think while it's a Navy which was originally under tremendous stress, and one way I've heard it put is while the U.S. military, the tip of the U.S. military spear is sharp, the shaft is brittle. And I think we are seeing that play out as well. So that certainly distraction, certainly I think, is in China's interest. And then I think finally, China's approach to this really has been, to any kind of conflict, is to resolve it through mutual discussion, respect for sovereignty versus any sort of direct military intervention. So I think it does seem, as we heard Katrina just say too, that it seems unlikely that China would intervene in the way that President Trump is hoping for.
But President Donald Trump puts a lot of stock in personal relationships. And he does have a relationship, we don't know if it's good or bad, but he certainly has one with Xi Jinping. And he's going to use that publicly to put pressure on China to try and help out. His biggest card he's got at the moment is cancelling the summit. What does that mean?
Well, I think that's an interesting approach because certainly I think from the Chinese perspective, again, it recognizes and respects the bilateral relationship between China and the United States. But I think also, as we've seen over the last year or so, China also exerts tremendous leverage over the United States. It's not just the rare earth metals, it's the Boeing aircraft, it's the soybeans sold by American farmers. So I think while certainly personal relationships matter in diplomacy, just as they say in Hollywood, it's not show friends, it's show business. And I think that's even more true of diplomacy.